What name are you bringing to the podcast and why? The No Shame in My Name podcast is a platform that celebrates and documents the stories behind names. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at No Shame in My Name Pods.
Giuseppe Cocconi and Philip Morrison, and basically it was called Searching for Interstellar Communications, and it argues that if there are other civilizations in the universe, how would they be how can we communicate with them? How would they be communicating with one another?
Students and graduates, welcome to PhD Lounge, the podcast of late-night interviews where PhD students have a drink and talk about their research topics. I am your host Luis, and today's session is a new late-night interview with a PhD student. But before introducing who the PhD guest is, let's give a happy birthday to the PhD Lounge podcast. Today, 29th of June, is the second anniversary of its foundation, and all I can say is that this small project of setting up a podcast and sharing thoughts and talks about PhD studies and lifestyle, whether through individual sessions or late-night interviews with many PhD students to all of you, listeners of the PhD Lounge, has been quite positive. With the PGR Award given by Swansea University, all sessions and late-night interviews conducted so far and its sharing, regardless of how small the reaching audience, the number of plays and downloads is currently, I feel grateful nevertheless to have begun this podcast journey and met PhD students with different research subjects, being fascinated by and having a bit of knowledge of their topics whilst committing to the long and challenging journey of the Doctor of Philosophy degree. Thank you again for being part of and helping PhD Lounge podcast grow. So after I finished marking the exams of undergraduate students, having a talk with my supervisors and planning my research trip to Oxford at the end of June to research some potential case studies for my project, I finally got my hands on setting up a new late-night interview with another PhD student. By the time you tune in, I will be in Oxford, and if you are a PhD student or not and happen to be there, feel free to reach me on the podcast's social media and to have a drink and talk about anything. I will be there until the 30th of June. Also, another good news I want to share with you is that the PhD Lounge is officially on Twitch with the username PhD Lounge without caps. To be honest, I am really bad with announcements because I am not a huge social media user, and when I post something might be more or less out of the time frame for and desires of many active social media consumers. I had a person working with me in publishing content around PhD, but since that person was also a student working to earn a wage, it was decided that it was time to move forward, thanking the person for the commitment and work that has been put through. Either way, PhD Lounge is on Twitch, and I'll share the link to the synopsis of today's late-night interview. I even shared it on my latest solo session, but again, it was a bit late. I am still playing around with it, so this late-night interview will not be on stream. Still, you can check my official experiment of talking on Twitch with my recent solo session, appreciating it in advance. After sharing this bit with you, it is time to officially introduce my upcoming guest. While I announced it on my last solo session of the PhD Iceberg series, I promised that there would be a late-night interview, and that promise is here. And more promising is that this is my first non-English speaker guest, meaning it is my first international PhD student, and I had the pleasure of talking with her about her research. She is in her third year of History of Science at the Technical University in Berlin, researching the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI for short, through radio wave astronomy during the Soviet Union. She also has a podcast in her mother tongue about interstellar anthropology, which I provide on the show synopsis if you want to check it out. So grab your seats, help yourself with a drink, and let's warmly welcome Gabriela Radulescu. Hi, Gabriela. Welcome to the PhD Lounge podcast, and thank you so much for being my guest at the PhD Lounge with an interesting topic. But before that, it was quite curious because you sent me an email last year, and with all this PhD burden we often have to do it with marking exams, thesis meetings, also attending conferences. Thankfully and finally, we are able to officially having our interview. So once again, thank you very much, and welcome to the PhD Lounge podcast.
Yes, hi Luis, and thank you very much. Yes, for having me on the podcast. I'm really glad that it worked out for us to meet. And yes, your email, your reply came like at the right moment when I also had some time, because I was also, yes, of course, busy on my side. So yeah, great to be here.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, it's just having this whole time to do it. I didn't forget you because I have all the PhD students that came to me as well. I also came to them because I was beginning this small project to say as an entertainment thing, and many of the students came to me. As I said, I also came to them. It took some time. And then you came to me, and I found your topic really interesting because it was something that I never heard. So it's more of a historical context about your research on radio communication waves through SETI. It's quite something new. I never heard it. Do you think that your research is also unaware for the general audience, to say the least?
I think it depends who you're speaking to. So, for example, if you speak about this topic in the US, people will usually know what SETI is. But for example, if you, like I do my PhD in Berlin, and no, it's not really a subject the topic that is really known. And especially like from a historical perspective, there is not so much research, and even more about the Soviet Union's involvement, or the Soviet bloc, or the international perspective on this. So yes, it depends where you're looking at, but I would say just outside of the US is not so popular.
Yes, I can see it is quite a complicated topic to explain, and also something that is not reachable, I should say, to a larger audience. So just for a particular type of audience, I dare to say. And but tell me a bit more about how did you get into the PhD? What has awakened your interest in exploring this topic from an historical point of view?
Yeah, that's it's going to be a long answer probably. Initially, it started with an idea that I had as a project in Anthropology of Science, which means that you study, as an anthropologist, as a social anthropologist, you study a community of people. And Anthropology of Science means that you study a community of scientists. And when I found out about the SETI community, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which searches for other intelligences, civilizations, other beings out there that have technology, I was really interested in a way of popularizing this topic, writing as an anthropologist mostly, and just observing and trying to translate, so to speak, for humanities and social sciences, what these scientists do and how they view things, and to just basically as a way of connecting the larger society with the scientific community. And I had, no idea about the history. I didn't think about historical perspective. It was more like thinking about it philosophically and anthropologically. And then, like with time, I've been outside of the academia, like formal academia, and the topic just came into my mind, and I was thinking about pursuing this PhD with this idea in mind, but I had I didn't know how to do that because, first of all, I was from Romania. It's not a topic that is popular there. At the time when I was thinking more about this topic, I had moved to Iceland, which is a very small country, and it doesn't necessarily have like a rich academic tradition that you can like pursue, I don't know, such ambitious projects, let's say. And yeah, I was starting to think about more and more about this topic and that I should do this PhD that I have in mind. And so I returned to studies. I decided to take another degree in history of ideas in science. And I came to Germany because I thought, okay, here the academic tradition is very rich and there are so many possibilities of research, so I can educate myself better. And I still had this idea in mind, but I didn't know how to proceed with this research project. And initially I thought, oh, okay, I cannot just go to the US and study this community because I don't know how to do this research otherwise. And I thought I would just do a PhD on something like related. I kind of didn't have courage to say, hey, I want to do this anthropological study of the SETI community in maybe a geographical space in which the topic is not so popular, and I would think that people are not going to take me seriously. So I thought I would just do a PhD on scientists that study dark matter, and then I would get the PhD, and then because I would get that PhD, I would be able to develop like a postdoc or something like that on this and go to the US. That was kind of my big plan. But while I was trying to get more courses on history of astronomy, and I couldn't really find very much on the 20th century astronomy, I took a class just by chance because I needed to like have a number of classes, and there was one on Soviet science. And I thought, oh, I'll just take this because I have this passion for Russia and the Soviet Union and so on. But I'm pretty sure it's not going to lead me anywhere. And in that class, I started to ask myself, because there were all these comparisons at one point between, okay, we had nuclear science development here, and we had this in the Soviet Union, and we had this in the US, and there were like all these comparisons. And I started to ask myself, wait, I know that SETI started in 1959, more or less. What was happening in the Soviet Union? Because, we know the US stories. And then I started to discover this immense unresearched history. And then I wrote a paper. I didn't even want the credits for that particular class. I mean, I didn't need the credits to finish the paper, but I wrote the paper because I was so interested in the topic, and then also I used that for my master thesis, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to apply for a PhD, and that led me to just learning Russian and so on, and then, a whole story around it.
Can see you have a rich collection of history and also anthropology. So I can say you took a pretty difficult road to chase something that is really interesting. And to be honest, I would dare to say I'm dumbfounded because of exploring so much different topics that we can combine. For example, just say science with anthropology, science with history, even maths. I assume. Did you take also maths to reinforce your current research?
In the process of taking classes of astronomy, I took one. I'm not sure if it's helped me directly with the research, but it was definitely interesting. I took one on Mesopotamian mathematics. I mean, not really the time frame that I am looking at, but it was really interesting to just give me this. I think the classes that I chose or that I took were also from this anthropological perspective to try to switch my mind to understand, because they were historical perspective analysis of this natural sciences that had to do with astronomy. So, nothing on the 20th century, unfortunately.
So, again, I find interesting thoughts you share and your desire to exploring something that is not spread so deeply, I could say, for a general audience, and it's quite restricted to a specific audience. And speaking of languages in the country that you lived in and you now currently in, did you have also to learn Icelandic as well, and Russian and Germany? You told me that you know Russian as well.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. It's very good that my research history or like educational history can be seen from that perspective. Yes, I mean, I learned Russian. I didn't speak Russian before I started this project, so I started to learn for the project. And yes, for Icelandic, I learned a little bit while I was there, but I was mostly surrounded by a lot of international people as well as Icelandic people. And it was actually not so necessary to speak Icelandic in the things that I was doing. So with time, I kind of quit because there was like no impulse for it. But I did learn some basic Icelandic.
Some conversational Icelandic then.
I wouldn't call it conversation. I would say just survival Icelandic.
So it was literally basic. So you would go to the supermarket and you need to buy some stuff. Would you speak in Icelandic or rather in English?
I wanted to say that people don't speak necessarily so much there, like in the supermarket, but I would speak like maybe asking like a simple question. I could ask it in Icelandic, but if I really want to search for a specific thing, I would use English, and I would excuse myself. Usually I would start with excusing myself. I would say in Icelandic that I don't speak Icelandic, and then I would start in English.
Interesting. Do you speak German there, or is the PhD totally in English?
So the PhD is in English, but I do speak fluently German. I mean, I learned it in school. It was actually the first foreign language that I learned. And and then I had some jobs also that had to do with German. Yes, and I also learned, also academically at one point, French when I went for 1 year to study in Brussels as an exchange student during the social anthropology degree. So, but now it's kind of weak. Yes, and I did learn Spanish as well at one point, and I was speaking it fluently, but now it's totally dead. And I think that Spanish and Russian, they kind of, they're in contrast with one another, because the more I learned Russian, the more I see that Spanish is decreasing. I don't know, there must be something in the brain.
No, yes, I have to agree with you on that point, especially when focusing in Spanish and Greek, because the phonetics and the sounding are quite interesting. I would dare to say as well, my native language in Portuguese, they are quite similar to some of the Russian sounds and Ukrainian sounds as well. And because we speak fast as well, and we have a strong accent, and sometimes it is not understandable for those who are learning or want to learn my language. So their fastest solution, I should say, was to let me learn Spanish, because they are quite the same. Although I do not agree with that, they're quite similar. They have equal words but with different meanings, and I keep saying this to them, and I try to give an example of it, and it goes off. I completely forget what I want to say, which examples I want to transmit. And still, oh no, Spanish is similar to Portuguese. They have equal words but different meanings. And then when it comes to, I want to give the example, say, for example, and it was just like in a blank statement that I complete go silence. So I don't know. It's just a curious observation, but it is. I agree with you in terms of when Spanish and Russian is quite similar, and also for the Greek language. So, in total, you would speak. How many languages do you speak then?
It depends. Like fluently in this moment, I would say I speak like Romanian, my native language, English, German, French, and Russian. Yes, and I have some basic knowledge in other languages, but I wouldn't say that I speak them. So.
Going to your topic, then could you just briefly explain what it is about and what are you researching essentially?
Yes, so it is about SETI, about the history of SETI. SETI is the acronym for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and it refers to an endeavor that has started in 1959 traditionally with a paper by two physicists, Giuseppe Cocconi and Philip Morrison, and basically it was called Searching for Interstellar Communications, and it argues that if there are other civilizations in the universe, how would they be how can we communicate with them? How would they be communicating with one another? And they, by brainstorming on this question, they think that, okay, they would be communicating through electromagnetic waves. And that is basically what light is. Optical light is part of electromagnetic radiation or part of the electromagnetic spectrum. But there are also other types of waves that are also electromagnetic waves, but they are not optical light. So radio light, for example, is something like that. And they all travel with the speed of light, the fastest thing in the universe. So if they want to communicate the fastest, they would be using this electromagnetic radiation, and they would be using certain frequency. And radio frequencies and certain radio frequencies, we know that they can travel through the universe without being absorbed, because optical light has a limit to it. So you can't really see with optical light very far in the universe. But suddenly at this particular time in 1959, already what was called radio astronomy had been developed. So humans could use radio waves to see, so to speak, in the universe. So they could see much farther. So I'm researching basically how this idea of searching for other civilizations, communicating with other civilizations, was born in this moment as a real scientific problem. Why it's a real scientific problem? Because it can be empirically investigated. Like, humans have always asked themselves if there are other intelligences out there, but now they had a technological basis to test empirically, to formulate a hypothesis and to test it empirically. So I investigate this mostly in the Soviet Union, and as well as in the international context, like especially between the West, especially the US, and on the other hand, the Soviet Union or the Soviet bloc. I'm not sure if it was clear.
No, it's totally clear, and I think whoever will listen to our interview will probably know and figure as well in getting the interest as well in reaching you, hopefully, and also being interested in knowing a bit more about your research. So from Cocconi, if I pronounced correctly, and Philip Morrison's paper in 1959, did you think that SETI was also explored even before this 1959 paper?
Yes, that's a really excellent question. Yes, it has been, and historians have looked at it and called it like the interplanetary communications era. There is very good historical work done by the former NASA historian Stephen Dick, and he has written a lot on this search for extraterrestrial intelligence, so I really recommend checking out his work. He has an entire career on this, and he also writes very, very nicely and very pleasantly, and also I think for more audiences. So what is called the interplanetary era is basically the beginning of the 20th century or end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And of course, radio waves were known at the time already for a while. And some other people have argued that, there might be some radio waves in the universe, used to communicate and so on. And also the idea of communicating through optical light was developed, and humans started to think about, we could be sending strong beams of optical light into the universe and someone will see us. So there were all sorts of ideas of communicating with extraterrestrial intelligence through electromagnetic waves, let's say. But yes, they were not being pursued, and you can see an entire period of literature on this. It kind of declines during World War II especially, and during both two wars. If you see at the literature, I don't have an exact review, but by checking actually lists of literature that have been compiled, not by me. Fortunately, there are good sources to look into this. You can see that there is a lot of literature on that. So definitely this is not something new, but what happens in this particular moment is that the technology has been developed. And the technology, of course, is being developed during World War II. It has to do with tracking all sorts of objects, for example, rockets that are being launched.
So then it was literally, there was also extraterrestrial life long before, but they wanted to do it. They kind of do it in the mid 20th century, not just before. So it was just experimenting, and then this is definitive. We're going to explore it more. We're going to develop even more, just from the 1960s onwards. But it's quite strange actually. It's quite strange actually, because they had to get a basis on it. I remember I was reading the articles that you sent to me. I was thinking as well, okay, so there's this article that I found in 2019 of the extraterrestrial civilizations, I think, that was written, I think it was written in Russian. I'm not so sure about it.
If you tell me the title or the author, then maybe I can say something about it.
Yes, I will check. It's the one from the SETI in Russia, USSR and the post-Soviet space, a century of research.
Yes, there's an excellent paper. Maybe I should emphasize it if it becomes part of the... that's the only historical review that we have like properly made about what happens in the Soviet Union by Lev Gindelis and Leonid Gurvits. And they are not historians themselves, but they documented the history of SETI. They've done like an excellent work outside of the boundaries of their research.
Isn't there any further going back any basis about, because I remember hearing in school, I don't know if this might be an alien topic in general, saying, okay, during the Renaissance period, I was also hearing in school that, okay, we had Galileo Galilei observing the moon and observing the stars, and also the possible communication of extraterrestrial life. Same with the theories of Nicolaus Copernicus. Do you reckon as well, if the Russians, based on those theories, to develop some of the radio communication waves?
Not necessarily, but there is astronomers tend to be very concerned with history and tend to think historically, and I think it has to do with the fact that when you observe something in the universe, you observe it already in the past. And the pioneer of SETI in the Soviet Union, Iosif Shklovsky is his name. He wrote a book in 1962 called Zelenaya Жизнь Разум, which means like universe, life, intelligence. It was later translated into English and co-authored with Carl Sagan and appeared under the title Intelligent Life in the Universe in 1966. And the way he wrote about this question, he basically did a review of different theories from different periods of time, and he basically did history of science in trying to link all these ideas and to show a certain continuation with SETI. So I would say, like, in this sense, they were, yes, inspired or tried to explain themselves, the community of SETI scientists, as part of a longer legacy. But more in terms of like what theories they would actually develop from the past, I would say that they would mostly be very connected with the what is called the cosmism, like movement called cosmism that appears in this interplanetary communications era, so end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. And there are like a lot of forward thinkers in that particular period, and they would be very much inspired by those theories. So I think that's the only connection.
Oh, interesting. And I can say, because for them to develop something to seek extraterrestrial life, they have to get a basis on something that has been tried before, or just theoretically or theorized before, and then trying to, through experiments. I can assume that they were tried so many times until those two scholars that you mentioned previously that wrote the article in 1959, and then to develop that theory that, okay, we can use those radio communication through wave sounding, and develop even more different types of wave sounding to seek extraterrestrial life. But how does that have a great extension of those communication waves, or just throughout the Milky Way, or can it? I dare to say, could it reach any other universes, since the universe is infinite?
It can reach, yes, beyond, like, basically, yes, the idea is to go as far as possible, into the universe. And at the time, like, the technology was not so, of course, so developed, but they had plans to, to search first for within 100 light years away. So basically, light that comes from, like, distances is measured in light years in astronomy.
Sure.
And also like the plan was to develop something that they could search for waves that are 1,000 light years away at the time. So this is kind of the distances that they were thinking at the time. I wanted to say something else with regards to another, and yes, also like they were drawing basically, yes, a lot of things had to converge in order to have this search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So it's interesting to know that it's a very interdisciplinary pursuit. Like Cocconi and Morrison, they weren't astronomers, they weren't radio astronomers, they had like basic knowledge in this thing. They were mostly particle physicists. Philip Morrison worked on the development of the nuclear bomb, and Cocconi went, after he wrote this paper, he worked at CERN. So they really came from different fields. So it's very interesting to see like how different fields converge for this. And another, let's say, SETI pioneer was Su Shu Huang, who was working at Berkeley, who basically looked at the possibility of life on other planets and looked at different conditions that converge in order for planetary systems to exist. And this is before the discovery of exoplanets. Exoplanets were discovered in the 90s, but he contributed a lot to framing this idea. And yes, and then the first search that was being conducted was prepared in 1959 at the time that Cocconi and Morrison were writing their article, when it was conducted in 1960. So there were like all these three things that basically converged, and like I think more scientists were thinking about it. And this is the time in which also the historian that I mentioned, the former NASA historian Stephen Dick, he called this like the biological evolutional perspective. So basically humans started to frame things based on evidence and on a lot of, yes, interdisciplinary, let's say, perspectives, that the universe basically evolved from like this primordial mass to big cosmic objects like stars, and then planets, and then life on planets, and then intelligent life on planet, and intelligent life that develops civilization. So this kind of framing of the universe and the evolution of the universe really helped to create this extraterrestrial intelligence object as something very real and pursuable.
Yes, and just to add to the fact that for more research and all that, and all of it, and the developments that we have done, I think we have advanced historically so damn fast in trying to communicate with the outer world, when we're investing in millions and millions of dollars, pounds, euros, whichever currency we can use to do a thorough investigation. And it is quite interesting, and we can say that we are not alone. And I don't know if you have recently heard about this interview of David Grush. I'm just going a bit of the topic, but it would worth to hear your comments on and about David Grush whistleblowing. They say whistleblowing of a UFO retrieval program that was conducted by the United States, and they trying to hinder that from the general audience. And then this gentleman decided to, okay, so I'm going to whistleblowing this through a channel called News Nation, and they're trying to denunciate, the USA is trying to retrieve us knowledge from that UFOs existed and all of that. And for me, I was hearing this and say, this would be something that Gabriela probably would to say a bit, having some comments. I don't know if have you seen it? Have you heard of it recently, or this recent interview?
I didn't hear of it, but I do have something to say about it. And first of all, it's like coming also from the there are two things, like as the history of UFO investigation or UFO communities or UFO problematic is very different from the history of SETI. And one of the concerns when SETI started was that they would be taken for a UFologist. And this was like a real concern and something that they always had to address. Now, without saying that, the history of ufology or UFO debates also has been very little studied, and it deserves studies of its own. And there are very few things. There is actually a very good historian that is working on this. His name is Greg Egigian. I hope I pronounce his name correctly. And as I mentioned, like there is very, very little research on that, but there are like intersections, of course. I mean, you can see especially in the Soviet Union, I can talk a little bit about that. At the 1981, the second Soviet American conference on SETI, you can see like a lot of ufologists being present at the conference from the Soviet Union side, and also kind of like the field kind of like converges in a way. And also because I studied the international perspectives, and I studied a particular organization that is called the International Academy of Astronautics. The reason for that is that it has what is called today the SETI Permanent Committee. So it's basically the only international organizations or group in which this question is being represented and discussed by scientists interdisciplinary as internationally as possible. And it meets regularly to give like serious attention to the topic. And when I was studying or researching the history of this particular committee, its history starts during the 60s. And I was checking the person that was founded this committee, and I went through his archive, and I saw that he was collecting all these UFO articles. So, of course, I couldn't find like exactly like what was the concern, but he was like just collecting all of these things. I think also for the concern of like, okay, we are being confounded with this particular community, so we have to keep like a separate stance from it, but also be informed about what's going on in that field.
No, it's well, it's quite informative, and glad that you pushed that topic, because we tend, obviously, I'm not knowledgeable, and I'm curious to know more about this, and trying, because as general, ordinary people, as historians arrogantly say it, I'm just trying to move myself away from that. That we tend to join UFO, and with now knowing about SETI, which is, as you said, completely opposite things, and it quite generates any conflict in that sense, I would assume. But now it's your turn, pushing the 1960s was where the world faced different things, also because of the end of the 60s, the USA reaching to the moon, or so they say, and exploration of the radio communicated wave strategies for SETI, as well as this political issue of the Curtain War, aka Cold War. Do you think that the tension between US and the USSR during that time had a major significance, had a major influence in studying and also investigating radio communication wave strategies for SETI?
Definitely it puts a limit to it, because, for example, like this had, of course, military reverberations, like all of this technology, and in order to perform SETI, you needed access in the Soviet Union to technology that was also being controlled by the state, so you couldn't really do SETI without having the official support. And because, of course, yes, radio waves are a very valuable asset for what is called like the space age and the space exploration. Yes, definitely, it gave like limitations to that, and limitations in terms of how much it could be communicated. So, I mean, there are like very interesting things in terms of like, because this is also the time in which radio frequencies for space are being allocated, or the rules are being changed. So there is a certain conflict over that.
How so?
Well, because if you're occupying a certain frequency, that someone else cannot really use it. So the problem was traditionally that there is very good research being done by other historians on this topic, that the rule was that radio frequencies in general are allocated by an international organization called International Telecommunications Union. It has existed since the 19th century. And the rule was kind of like the first come, first served basis. So basically this meant that a certain state starts using a frequency, it claims it says, this is ours, we use this frequency for I don't know what. And this was kind of functioning, but with the space age, this wasn't necessarily functioning so well, and the Soviet Union was notorious for doing this kind of like stealing frequency, saying we are using this, and they were just taking large parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, basically.
So they were stealing from, you mean the radio frequencies from the US, essentially?
Basically, they were claiming. They were not stealing, but they were saying, we are using this. And the thing is that this didn't really work. Like, it was kind of like, how to call it? Like, there were not clear rules in this sense. So this is a time in which this is being totally reshaped during the space age. And, like, the US argues for what is called the full radio frequency allocation plan. So basically to have like an overview of the frequencies and say who is using this frequency, for what service, and so on, like largely to have it full. And they managed to get it in place during this time. And it's really a strategic move for the US, also because it's trying to establish its satellite communication system. And it's a global satellite communication system. So
besides the the conflict of both military superpowers, also political, so they had to extend as well for radio communication wave strategies. And also, I could say, so they want to divide SETI, their strategies. So this is mine, you cannot touch it. And the other side, this is mine and you are stealing from it. Was
this is like, in general, what I said is basically for the frequencies that are being used, like for the active pursuit of outer space. So in general, like for SETI, I would say that things are in a way like much simpler, because if you're just like listening, then you only need to like protect a certain frequency. So there is this idea of protecting the hydrogen line, which is the main frequency in which SETI is, or the one in which traditionally SETI was being conducted, or at least during this time, or what is called the water hold particular frequencies that are in which also the hydrogen line is included. So as long as that frequency is protected and is not being used for something else, but only for radio astronomy, then astronomers can actually, receive information in that. And it's not only being used for SETI, is valuable for astronomy in general, radio astronomy.
So and then. Was this a long? Did this extend for long, or just until when the U.S. and the Soviet Union agreed a peace treaty and disentangled USSR in 1991?
Like SETI declines actually a lot in the Soviet Union in the 80s. Like generally, like technological development, it's maybe not so good. So SETI continues very limited in the 90s. And I wouldn't say that there is a conflict necessarily during this time. There is scientific communication between the two parts. There's limited scientific communication, but I don't see from the sources like any conflict, like anything like. So in space, you have this the problem generally in space, the thing that I explained with radio frequencies. But in SETI, you don't see this conflict. You see just scientists talking very directly with one another, limited, of course, because they cannot exchange a lot of technical details. And what you see as a decline in communication and a decline of science in the Soviet Union generally.
So that decline in communication did also influence into that agreement, that, let's say, peace treaty of the declination of the Soviet Union.
I think it influences it's an interesting moment, like the last period of the Soviet Union, because this is the time that in the International Academy of Astronautics, the organization that I mentioned that has this SETI permanent committee, a declaration of principles, like rules for if one discovers extraterrestrial civilizations, are being established. And perhaps, like arguably, I'm not sure if this could have been established in the early period. I'm not sure exactly, but this is a particular time in which the historical data shows that, okay, this is the particular time in which these are being established. And the concerns of the scientists from the US that initiate this is that if the Soviet Union is going to detect an extraterrestrial civilizations, even if the scientists themselves, we are in good communication with them, but they will be limited to actually tell us, they will be prohibited most probably to tell us that they have discovered an extraterrestrial civilization. And they want to ensure to these principles that civilizations, that any state basically that discovers, or anyone who discovers this, has to communicate this as an imperative to the outside world, to everyone else on Earth, because everyone deserves to know. So I would say like this is one of the things that develops when the Soviet Union starts to decline. But how to connect it further, I think it's perhaps for a different project, or for other historians that I encourage to study this topic and to look into it, like what are the connections in that matter.
Oh wow, it sounds a broader topic to explore, and it involves plenty of things, and in the end it gets quite quite a conflict in between nations. But in the end, I mean, we all live in the same space, so why not discuss it civilized, and and then stopping playing with this like mind games and using the military, and then trying to influence within certain areas, because I think it's just in the end it's just money is in the place. To be honest, we cannot live without money, and for them to develop, either they invest and they have to agree with certain rules, or you don't get it.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, and this has to do, like, I think the conflict starts actually in the post-Soviet period. So one of the problematic issues is that at the turn of the century, so starting from 2000 or 1999, a series of messages to extraterrestrial civilizations have been sent from Ukraine with the help of the international community. But some people in the West especially were not necessarily happy with this, because the agreement or the desired agreement was that, you know, everyone has to agree on sending this, and there has to be a much stronger framework for sending signals. And this is what is called the Great Transmission Debate. This is how this is known, has appeared in a post-Soviet world, and it is being shaped along the lines of Russia and the West, or Russia and the US. I mean, it doesn't perfectly overlap, but there are some intersections, and you can frame it in this sense. And also, like, what I see in this SETI Permanent Committee, like, in the later period, like, although at the beginning there are a lot of Soviet bloc actors, so the initiator of this committee is actually from Czechoslovakia, and then from the early days there is Poland that is being represented there. So you really see like the Soviet bloc being represented. And then these actors disappear. So if you look today at this SETI Permanent Committee, you don't really have like Eastern Europe, and you have a lot of US actors, and very few people from Russia, a couple of them.
You get touch the point. And also this is quite like educational to some extent, because we Westerners are used to hear, okay, the United States made everything, they invented many stuff, they were the ones who were the first to go to space and to develop SETI and other things. I mean, it's just saying that I still don't understand why they did this. And then now with the internet growing so fast, and we have so much accessible information, although many of us find difficult to develop our own critical thinking and say, why did the US did this? Did the US did it at all? And then years later, I just found out that the Eastern Europe and further east, they literally developed this. I can say, for example, for going to the space, I know that Yuri Gagarin was the first. I think he was the first one. Correct if I'm wrong. He was the first one, and he was in the late 50s. He was 1961. And then they say, okay, but the United States went to the moon. Now it's getting quite skeptical, because we still don't know if they do it. But actually, even this is reproduced in different documentaries, and say, so why isn't Yuri Gagarin well portrayed? I mean, it's just, in the end, it's just about politics and fun of this rivalry between Russia and the US, which we know it has extended towards the topic that we already know and what is currently happening. But we just don't want to get along onto this issue. I mean, we're just spreading their wings into different things. It's just But it's great, and it's curious to know that countries such as Czechoslovakia and Poland and probably Bulgaria, Hungary, and Eastern countries got involved into this development of SETI, and not just by the US itself. It's just around conflict of interest and politics, nonetheless.
Yes, I have a few comments on what you said. I think it's very relevant. Yes, Hungary as well, and Hungary is a very interesting case because one of the Hungarian astronomers, Ivan Almar is his name, who I had the pleasure to talk to personally on Zoom, of course.
Oh, nice.
And he was also the chair of this SETI permanent committee for a while. And yes, with regards to the first things in space, so if you look at the historiography, and there are very good studies of the space age in general. So we know that 1957 is the year that the first satellite is being launched to space. The Soviet Union does that, and then the first human in space, Yuri Gagarin, as we mentioned, in 1961. And the idea is, what history tells us and what historical studies tell us is that up to, let's say, the end of the 60s, and beginning of the 70s, the Soviet Union basically dominates the space race, and then things start to shift later. So and the US takes a lead gradually. So this is what historians have shown, and this is what we know so far. And I think this is also being followed with regards to SETI in terms of maybe enthusiasm and support. So in the Soviet Union, as I mentioned, you need to have the official. You can't really do SETI without power. So what is called the USSR Academy of Sciences, which controls every scientific activity. And SETI scientists are very lucky because there is one person there, Vladimir Kotelnikov, who is very interested in the subject, and it is actually under him that the first message to extraterrestrial civilizations is being sent in 1962. And now, though, it's being sent in Morse messages, and the three words are Lenin, USSR, and the Russian word Mir, which can be translated both to peace and world. And of course, this is part of a research project. They were trying to measure what is called the astronomical unit, which is important for going into outer space. You need to have this measurement established exactly because it was estimated, and it was really important to establish it in order to be able to launch objects, because you really needed to calculate exactly. It wasn't more about astronomy, it was about launching objects into outer space. And as part of that, the Soviet Union does this, and of course it has very good propagandistic purposes because it's all over the newspapers in the Soviet Union, and it's being, let's say, a display of power, like what we as a Soviet nation, a Soviet state can do.
It's all about propaganda, and there must be two sides of the coin. There exists two sides of the coin, and we should look into one into another. And thanks to the internet, that has become so exponential, that has grew exponentially, then we have more access to it. But again, as we were talking before, critical thinking here is important, and it's one of the things that during a PhD, especially starting from the undergrad, it is so important to see, and especially for whoever wants to do this research. And now, since we're talking about the SETI and also the international space community and all that, who created those space laws? Is there any space laws actually, and who created them? Was it the Russians or the USSR or the US?
I would say it's mostly the US. So I don't focus on space law in general, but space law doesn't really exist until the space age begins, and this is a concern. And it's interesting actually that there is let's say a point of intersection between extraterrestrial intelligence and space law in general. So the first time that extraterrestrial intelligence appears as a question of the space age is it is as part of arguing for the need for outer space law. So before the launch of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite by the Soviet Union, already in 1956, both countries knew that they will both launch a space program. And it was kind of like, I think the space race was even much more felt because there was all this tension. We don't know who is going to be the first, so we're trying to spy on each other. And in this context, when the international astronautical community meets, there is a lawyer who is the president of the American Rocket Society. And he proposes this idea of, he suddenly has this concern for extraterrestrial intelligence and how other sentient beings in the universe, as he put it, and what effects we might have on these extraterrestrials given that we're going into space. And in this context, he introduces the idea that we need to have space law. And because we don't have proper rules, and the rules that we have for flying objects, they apply to things that don't apply to space. We need to have this framework. So it's interesting from this point of view that extraterrestrial intelligence can address the need for outer space. And he develops the concept of what is called meta law. And he calls all law that exists at this moment, he called it starkly anthropocentric. And we need to have this law that takes into consideration that there are other beings in the universe, and everything that we do in space has to respect the possibility that there are other beings out there. And not only intelligent, he says that even communication with an amoeba has to be taken into consideration, then to risk of damaging something. And from this moment on, space law is being developed. And we have what is called the International Institute of Space Law that is formed in 1960. And it is concerned with outer space law, and it formulates outer space law since then. And not only with regards to extraterrestrial civilizations, but just in general, for all sorts of issues. So, and I would say, yes, the Soviet Union, I haven't researched exactly, I don't have the overview of how much is being involved in space law, but I would say the US and the West generally take the lead in formulating and arguing for outer space law. And yes, it would be interesting to know how much of the Soviet Union interests are being addressed, or how much they are discussed at truly something global, because we don't only have the Soviet Union and the US, we have a lot of other countries, right, that whose hegemony and sovereignty have to be protected and argued for.
Sure. So, do you know what is the first law? Do you have in memory? What was the first law, and if it is still applicable until today?
I think there are more concerns that are addressed first, but one of the first basically is separating outer space from airspace. This is basically the foundation of outer space law, because the idea was that some lawyers argued, come to think of it, that airspace extends infinitely into the universe. So what is airspace? Airspace is the space above one's country, and it was being defined, okay, so if I'm the Soviet Union, then I have control over everything that is flying over my territory. But no matter how far away into the universe, but the Earth is rotating, everything is rotating, so you can't really have satellites or anything else. So this didn't really make sense. You can't even have another planet, or star, flying over your territory. It was really absurd. And they were arguing for this particular framework. And there was this particular lawyer, Korovin is his name, who was very, very strong on these things. And the West was trying to change very much this, because it was not a functional framework. And now we have what is called the Karman line. It's actually more like a popular myth, so it's not we don't have it like something that is being established in itself, because it's also problematic. You can't really say where exactly space begins, and this has been a problem because scientists have tried to formulate it. But at least it's functioning. So we have a functional concept. So based on the fact that already satellites had been launched, there are separate rules for that. But there is no particular point. I mean, the Karman line is being argued that it's 80 or 100 kilometers, it depends who you're asking, above Earth. But because of the problematic of actually establishing a particular limit, it cannot become like a law, but it's something like that is orienting people.
So it's like developing space laws, but then in the end, it's trying to delineate a certain border between countries that are involved in the formation of space laws, and also using their own satellites. So it's just saying that it's not quite reasonable to delineate, because the Earth is rotating, as you said, and the universe is infinite. So in that case, also we would lose countless time to count the billions of stars, and even they were defined by different spatial theorists, most of them Indians. I do not know how to pronounce them, so I don't want to risk them. So it's just okay. So this constellation of Orion was discovered by an X from Y nationality. Okay, so it's a boundary. So you can't step your own your US satellites there. No, then I mean it's just completely unreasonable to delineate something that is outer space and trying to force as if there was a inhabitable world that also functions in that. I don't know. I don't know. It's just human minds are so incredible, but sometimes we're not thinking so well of how can we behave ourselves in our outer space.
Yes, and law was not really taken into consideration. I mean, it took, I would say it could have been thought of more before, as we know it, but not everyone saw like the need to address this. And without a few key people who really pushed for it, I'm not sure how long it would have, maybe it would have taken longer.
Yes. Does the radio communication wave strategies are also implemented within the space laws?
Yes, I mean, they are part of the rules for allocating frequencies, but I wouldn't be able to tell you, like, to give you an overview now. But basically, it's the idea that what you're using, the thing that I explained with the frequency allocation plan. So we have frequencies that are being used for radio astronomy, frequencies that are being used for communication satellites or observation satellites, and so on. So we have a good, let's say, overview of what frequencies are being used for what service, basically. I'm not sure how much legally binding these agreements are, so what the status is exactly with this frequency. So I'm not sure if you can actually punish someone by because they have not respected the use of certain frequencies. So I would say that it's probably very tricky. But I'm not the best person to ask in this moment.
So do you think that when if by using the radio communication strategy, what would be the reaction if we would find and trying to communicate with other extraterrestrial species? How would that affect historically the change of our perception of historical space?
I think it would definitely impact everyone. I cannot imagine one person who would just say, I am indifferent. And the thing is, how fast can we communicate? So if we know that, what does it mean that we have established communication with a civilization? It means, first of all, how far away is that civilization? It will probably be far away, so it would take like maybe 50 years to actually establish that. So we would have like a delay in that. It will not be like the way we can communicate. But I think it will definitely revive the attention for this subject historically. I think more historians will start investigating what different theories and try to pluralize this historiography that we have on SETI and try to investigate. And I think it would revive also the sense of locality. People started to investigate, okay, what maybe I will also ask myself, what was happening in being a Romanian, what was happening in Romania, what there are some SETI pioneers there, and I think it just revives attention to looking at history. And, historians will come up and say, okay, we have this particular moment in, it's a similarity with this moment. And in terms of history, it will just revive the topic, and I think it would be positive. Now, in terms of society and technology and politics, I think it would justify the existence of the International Academy of Astronomy SETI Permanent Committee, which is not necessarily a popular entity at this point. And even within the scientific community or the astronautics community, it has its challenges of maintaining its legitimacy, right? Because we haven't discovered any civilization. Maybe we will never discover.
Sure. No. I do understand, and because it's quite complicated to, because we live in our world. We have all things. It's great that we do this, and because it will change the history of our civilization, of the continuous civilizations that we studied so far. And especially, this is something I should say. Do you reckon this is a recent thing?
I mean, you mean SETI? Like SETI, yeah, is considered to exist since 1959.
Sure.
So I'm not sure. Like, well, what do you mean if it's something new in terms of?
So something new about the research that PhD students and other scholars investigating this. This is quite recent and will change, of course, the course of spatial history.
Yes, this is definitely in terms of PhD topics, yes, this is very recent. I would say that we need more PhDs in this particular domain, and yes, focused on different geographical spaces. Like, for example, even within the Soviet Union, you have the role of other, like the Soviet Union was a union of different republics. And for example, Armenia plays a part in the story, and to the best of my abilities, I have tried to do some research on that, and there is much more to look into it and to understand it also from that perspective, and not to write only about Russia.
Can you give an example then? Can you give an example of the Armenian case study?
Yes, so in Armenia, two major events happened. One in 1964, what is called the first All-Soviet Union Conference on Extraterrestrial Civilizations and Communication with them. It's being organized at the Burakan Astrophysical Observatory. And this event is not the only one. In 1971, the first Soviet-American Conference on Communication with Extraterrestrial Intelligence also takes place at the same observatory. And now, the question is like, why did it take place? Why didn't these conferences take place in Russia, in Moscow? I mean, since, it needed the support of the USSR Academy of Sciences. So what does it say about the role of Armenia in space research or in SETI or in other things? And there is no SETI research basically in Armenia, but Armenia plays a role in organizing these conferences.
Wow. So with USSR and the United States, they are not alone. I mean, amid the USSR countries, there's always another country that also intervenes and also helps in develop the history of SETI and all of it. Since we are getting to the close of this interesting topic, I say really interesting, and would love to explore a bit more. And also I want to talk with my father about this, because he loves things about the universe, and also trying to find, not say conspiracy theories, but things with science that will debunk many of the conspiracy theories about SETI, about the Earth, about the universe itself, because he loves about this. And when I said to him, I'm going to have an interview with Gabriela from Romania, studying the history of spatial communication, and say, oh, do this, nice, it will be a great topic. I look forward to hear when it is launched. I say, okay, it will be so interesting. But now, since we are almost ending of the session, I would like to know, using your own expertise, your own PhD studies, and you are working as a senior director of the history of the astronomy department at SpaceX, and Elon Musk has thought that having a museum in space would be interesting, and is currently under development. Whilst he's continued to work into his project of someday reaching Mars, and if there is life in there, we'll see what will happen. What would you say to him about the idea of creating a history of space museum, and how would you organize it?
I think, it's a very imaginative question. I would organize it around, I would put extraterrestrial intelligence and human contact with it. So I would return to, when I mentioned this concept of metalaw that was being developed in the late 50s, I would put that at the center. So contact with we have to start from the assumption or the possibility that there is other life there that has to be protected. And, by protecting other lives, we also protect ourselves. And this would be like the main narrative that we have to say. We don't have to conquer outer space. We don't have to colonize outer space. We can do that, but why not organize our narratives? Like, have the way we study the past is also the way we project ourselves into the future, and to just write a history of how we are trying to protect life and intelligent life, both on Earth and off Earth. So, okay, how can we organize this? Like, what kind of things do we want to say? We can write the histories in which, scientists have argued about this idea. So, for example, the SETI pioneer in the Soviet Union, Joseph Shklovsky, when he wrote his book, he developed this idea of crisis of civilizations, that civilizations might be destroying themselves before, and we don't really see them, because once they have a certain technological advance, they destroy themselves, they have this technological crisis. So this poses the question of how can we protect life through technology instead of colonizing objects? And to just show these ways of articulating this protection of life and protection of intelligence, protection of everything, right?
So it's all around heritage, spatial heritage in this sense.
Yes, like heritage in all sorts of ways, and also showing this diversity of heritage, and not only, by the way, there are others that go into outer space. No, everyone, needs to have access to outer space. And for example, like, I was impressed by the Space Research Museum in Armenia. Is one of the few small countries that has such a museum, and their contribution to space research within the Soviet Union was a really protected heritage, like historical heritage. And being also a country that doesn't necessarily have a lot of resources, they preserve this history it's very well protected and very cherished. And astronomy in general, like the legacy of the Burak Astrophysical Observatory, and just having this connection with how we protect knowledge and life and everything. Yes. I think we need this kind of museums.
Where is the Space Museum in Armenia? Is it in Yerevan?
Yes, the Space Research Museum, yes, it's in Yerevan, yes. It's outside of this, probably the only museum, like all the museums are basically in this more or less central, and this one you have to go a little bit not outside of Yerevan, but it's not in the main area. But it's a small museum, but it's definitely worth visiting it.
Have you been there before?
Yes, I mean, I've been there when I was doing my research 2 years ago in Armenia. So I had the honor of spending some time at the Burak Astrophysical Observatory. I spent a lot of time in Yerevan, and I've explored like a lot of museums, and I was trying to get as much information as possible about the era and how astronomy is being, like, this intellectual scientific heritage is being protected. And yes, and I have to say, like, one thing, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Starmus Festival. It's a festival
Festival. No, I'm unbeknownst.
Oh, it's organized since a few years, and it's a festival that combines science with arts, and it really is for popularizing science. And it was founded by an Armenian scientist, and he it was organized in different countries at the beginning. I think in Spain, in Canary Islands the first time, then in Norway, and last year it was the first time that it was being organized in Armenia. Unfortunately, I was not there. I was there 2 years ago, but I'm really curious to see, like, this festival, and other this kind of events, in different places organized, and reviving, the memories from those places.
Well, if I get the opportunity to go to Armenia, to Yerevan, to also check on not just the Space Museum, but also an archaeological museum of the ancient Middle East, because also the Romans and the Parthians, what I'm researching about hybridity and third space, Armenia had a great role in mediating both superpowers at the time. If I get the opportunity, then I will check all the museums of archaeology, ancient history, and also the spatial history, including the Starmus Festival as well.
But yes, it's a very good idea.
So final questions to wrap up our fantastic late night interview. Tell me, what are your thoughts on doing a PhD, And what advice do you have for students who are listening to this session, but including who is interested in researching this interesting topic?
Well, I would say that the topic has to be something that you're passionate about. This comes like from my stance. I mean, or at least you have to be clear why you are doing the PhD. So if it's a job or a degree that you need in order to get something else, be clear about that. If it's a topic that you really want to write about and it's maybe about writing and you need this research background to give you legitimacy, just be very clear what is the PhD for you. And you don't need to have everything figured out from the beginning. So you don't need to have the project framed the way it's going to actually end. I learned that changes a lot. And like there are many variables that can come that. And yes, be prepared for all sorts of challenges. I mean, not only intellectual challenges, but just personal challenges, because, you commit for a few years, like 3 years in general, depending where you're doing your PhD, but be prepared for that time frame for a lot of challenges, and accept that you have to deal with them. And take them as something that, you integrate into the way you're working and accept them. Sure.
And this is what PhD is all about. It's about being committed and also having some discipline and enduring their mental health as well, which is truly important. And whether anyone wants to study full-time or part-time, you have to endure this long journey. Because they say PhD are for smart people, PhD are for this, PhD are for that. I think PhD is for everyone who are willingly to take it. And it's all about the PhD world is not just sitting down writing a thesis, it's going everywhere. You said yourself, you went to Armenia, you went to many places before. I'm also having the experience to go to other places, mostly within the UK, but still PhD is a great journey. You can do many things within it, going to conferences, writing articles, etc. Do you have an article, by the way, you've wrote recently, or you wrote a long time ago?
I have something in preparation so hopefully I'll get something on Armenia that is not necessarily part of the PhD project. I'll see how that one would work. It's under preparation. It's basically ready. You just have to, I'll see.
I'd like to know about it. If you'd like to send me through email, I'll be very happy to read the abstract and all of it. I'm interested now.
Yes, there's a lot of things, yes.
Oh, well. So to know more about your research and your incredible passion for SETI and historical radio communication waves, where do the listeners can follow you on social media if they wish to speak to you online, or even in person if they are studying the same university you're studying?
First of all, yes, I want to say that I would be delighted to talk to, any interested person in the topic. I'm always very flattered when people are interested in the subject. And yes, if you are in Berlin, then just hit me up. Like, I am on Twitter, Facebook, where else? Yes, I made a small podcast in Romanian, just 5 pilot episodes on my topic, just as trying to popularize this topic in Romania or for Romanian-speaking audiences, for which is maybe not so available. And you can find that on Spotify. It's called Anthropologie Interstelara, which means interstellar anthropology. Where else? Yes, I mean, I also use LinkedIn and Academia Edu. I'm not active at the moment on these networks in terms of posting anything, but sure, I would be really glad if people reach out to me. I'll answer any question.
What is the university you're studying in Berlin?
It's Technical University of Berlin, so Technische Universität Berlin.
Technical University in Berlin. And then the podcast will be, I'll say in English, Interstellar Anthropology then. Now, whoever's listening, please use Google Translator or DPL, translate it. And I want to listen a bit. I don't speak Romanian, but as I know one thing, that Romanian was obviously is a Latinist language, so I can understand more or less what historians say. I was hearing a Netflix documentary called with the Rising of the Ottomans, and when they were present in Romania, I think they were talking about the Battle of Târgoviște. There was like a Romanian historian who wasn't speaking in English; he was speaking in Romania. I had to put the CC captions on it, but some of the words I understood it. But I won't say now to you now which one was it because it's been a long time. So, and that's it.
Yeah, but very well pronounced Târgoviște is the first time that I hear someone like a foreigner pronouncing this. A very good pronunciation, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
How to pronounce your surname? Because I also investigated how to pronounce it. How do you pronounce your surname?
Radulescu.
Radulescu. It
Perfect,
sounds Spanish
yes.
as well.
Okay.
Gabriela, that is up for the session. Thank you so much for coming. I got some lights about the history of space and also about even more a bit of your topic, and I look forward to know more in due time. If you're around here in the UK and you are participating in a conference where they probably give me a shout, and if this is online, I will be very pleased to attend it.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Yes, if you're ever, of course, in Berlin around, let me know. Yes, I'll be happy to keep you updated with my research.
I'll let you know.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis, for this opportunity, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Likewise. And this was the late night interview with Gabriela Radulescu regarding her fantastic and interesting topic of SETI and her ways of approaching her research while doing other roles related to her research topic, as well as her thoughts on doing a PhD. This was an unknown topic perhaps to all of us, including myself as host. History can be expanded to any wide range of subjects, that it is not only what is under the earth, but also what is in outer space and what things we did throughout history, especially during a difficult period when the Soviet Union or USSR and the USA were in a political and military conflict, and it expanded to different areas like the one Gabriela is investigating. Thank you to any listener who enjoyed hearing another outstanding late-night interview at the PhD Lounge podcast, and thanks to Gabriela for having some time to have a relaxed talk by sharing your excellent topic and make the listeners curious about it. Check her podcast in Romanian about interstellar anthropology, which may whet your interest in the history and anthropology of science. It is in Romanian, and so is the title, but I hope that will not burden you if you are a native Roman speaker or not if you know the language. If you are interested in Gabriela's research, check her social media and academic platforms where she is featured. I will leave some links on the synopsis where Gabriela has been featured, making it easier for you to reach her. If you enjoyed hearing this late night interview, please and thank you for leaving a review and sharing it on your favorite podcast platforms: Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Anchor FM, known now as Spotify for podcasters, and many others, or on the website phdlounge.co.uk to help PhD Lounge to reach more listeners and, of course, for the podcast algorithm. Feel free to donate on the website by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee and Buzzsprout symbols on the top left side and checking other episodes you have not listened to yet. Follow also the social media of PhD Lounge: Facebook, PhD Pod Lounge, Instagram, PhD LMF, and Twitter, PhD Loungecast. And if you are a PhD student who wants to have a late night interview, drop an email at luisPhDlounge@gmail.com. Thank you all for tuning in. It has been a pleasure.